Our next candidate is Mayor Pete Buttigieg of South Bend, Indiana. Mayor Pete is new to the national stage, but he's speaking out on our issues. He's a Navy veteran and a Rhodes Scholar. Let's give him a big hello. Come on, Mayor Pete Buttigieg.
Well, Mayor Pete, thanks for coming back to Iowa. You're practically living here right now.
Starting to feel that way.
Right. And there's a whole lot of Teamsters in the House today who want to know why they should vote for a guy named Buttigieg.
Sounds good. Well, first of all, I want to thank you for having me. Bring greetings for our Teamsters in South Bend, everybody who is plowing snow and picking up leaves and taking care of our parks and making our city a livable place. We've got a lot of Teamsters right in our administration, and we're thankful for them. So I want to make sure, first and foremost, that you know that I stand with organized labor in order to build up an economy that actually works for us. Not just when the stock market's looking good, that's nice, but actually making sure that one job is enough, actually making sure that working conditions meet our expectations, and building up the middle class in this country. If you start the clock right around the time I was born, you see two things happen. One thing you'll see is that inequality increases dramatically in the United States. The other thing that you'll see happening is an assault on organized labor and declining union membership. I believe those two things are not a coincidence. They happen at the same time for a reason. And the time has come, as I have proposed in our new Rising Tide economic agenda, to make sure that we support and expand not just better wages, making sure that $15 is the floor for the federal minimum wage across the United States, but also support the right of workers to organize for better pay, for better conditions, and that we support not just how you can unionize, but who can unionize. There's a lot of gig workers out there right now. As far as I'm concerned, if you're doing a gig, you're doing work. If you're doing work, that makes you a worker. And if you're a worker, you ought to have the right to organize, and you ought to have labor protections to go with it. I come from the exact part of the country that this president pretends to speak to and for. I live in the industrial Midwest, just about, I don't know which way's east, but just about 7 hours. One guy's pointing that way and one is pointing that way. So, is that way? Okay, well, wherever it is, it's not that long of a drive up I-80 to get to where I am. And I have seen what our communities are up against in different parts of this country because we no longer have a system, economically or politically, that works for us. I also know what we're up against as a country in the sense of the need to come together. I'm running not only to bring an end to the current presidency, but to launch the era that's going to come next. If you just stop and picture what it's actually going to be like the first day that the sun comes up and Donald Trump is no longer the President of the United States. It's a good picture. We're looking forward to that day. We're ready for that day, but think about what it'll actually be like. Think about how divided our country will be, even more torn up over politics than we are right now. That means we're going to need a president who can solve big problems to empower workers and enhance the life of this country and prepare us for the future. And do it in a way that actually starts healing and unifying this country rather than further polarizing it. I'm running to be that president because that's what we're going to need from the White House come January 2021.
Question from our audience, Mayor Pete. And this question is from Dan Bean. Dan is a 23-year Teamster of Local 554 in Omaha, Nebraska. He works for Highland Dairy there. He has a question about pension protection, specifically BLA from CS Active perspective. And where is our audience member? Dan.
I've been called worse than damn. I'm a Teamster with Local 554. I'm honored to be here today with my union brothers and sisters. I'm 58 years old and was born and raised in Council Bluffs, Iowa. I still live there. I've been employed in a dairy processing plant for the last 23 years. I joined the Teamsters Union as soon as I was eligible. I've forgone pay raises in contracts to receive increased contributions to my retirement fund. I've hoped to retire at age 62, a short 4 years from now. As you know, the Central States Pension Fund is projected to be insolvent at about the same time. I have no desire to work until I die, and I'm certain the other 400,000 active and retired workers who have invested in the Central States Pension Fund feel the same way. My question is, what is your plan to address the pension crisis and restore retirement security for American workers?
So the bottom line is that you deserve to know that the promise made to you will be kept, because that was a two-way promise. As you said, often there was a trade-off between a pay raise and putting into the pension, which means it ought to be there for you, and that's not about doing you a favor, that's about keeping a promise. Now, right now, the Butch-Lewis Act has been designed to make sure that we secure and support multi-employer pensions, and I support that legislation. I also support the broader idea that our country has a responsibility to make sure that everyone can retire with security. Even for those who are not fortunate enough to be represented by a strong union and to have the benefits of some of those negotiated pension plans, we have to begin by making sure that Social Security is there for all of us. And this president talked a lot about caring about Social Security, only to turn around and have a budget that took funds away from it. That's unacceptable. And don't listen to anybody who says that there's no way to keep Social Security solvent without cuts. It's just not true. As long as we're willing to raise revenue by things like collecting those payroll tax dollars past $250,000 incomes and up. If we do that, and a couple other tweaks that do not involve cutting benefits, then the Social Security fund will at least be solvent to where I'm planning on collecting on it and beyond. So we got to do that. I also believe we ought to set up a public option 401k in the United States, eligible for everybody to participate. Healthcare is not the only place where a public option could do a lot of good. And so we're proposing at any employer you would be able to get it. It probably won't be as strong as the pension program you're participating in that we must protect. But for those not as fortunate, we got to make sure that we create another alternative, and we would have employers matching 2 to 1 what employees put in. The last thing I want to mention, just as we contemplate more and more Americans retiring and aging into the need eventually for long-term care, is that we have got to do something about long-term care in this country. I remember the conversation with a social worker in the hospital when my dad became ill. And the social worker explaining to my mom in a period when we thought that he might need long-term care, that the best answer would be to spend herself into poverty so that we would qualify, family would qualify for Medicaid. And thinking, is that how things work in the United States of America? So I'm proposing Long-Term Care America, a cash benefit for anyone who is eligible, who needs those expenses covered, $90 a day, which would go a big part of the way toward the cost of long-term care. And making sure that we continue to enhance opportunities for care and aging in home and not just in institutions, which Medicaid and Medicare often push folks into. So I know that's a long way from your horizon, but I just want to mention it as another retirement-related thing that deserves to be taken seriously. In addition, of course, ending where we began, to making sure that multi-employer pensions are secure and rock solid for the future.
Mayor Pete, you've proposed guaranteed bargaining rights for all American workers. And if you are successful in achieving that, if you are elected president, how do you believe it would transform America's workforce and America's economy?
Well, I believe it's crucial to making sure that the economy actually works for us. Think about it this way. We generally look at manufacturing jobs as some of the best, most precious jobs we need to make sure we grow in our economy, right? They're good jobs. But we didn't used to think of them as good jobs. 100 years ago, manufacturing jobs were generally considered dirty, dangerous, and underpaid. They became good jobs when workers got together, organized into unions, and demanded that they become good jobs with good pay, safety, and good benefits. This must now be done for other kinds of jobs where you don't see that kind of representation. I'm thinking about home health care workers. I'm thinking about fast food workers. We were with fast food workers a few days ago in Charleston who were fighting for their right to $15 an hour in a union. I'm thinking about a lot of farm workers who don't have the ability to organize. Not to mention what they're doing to public sector workers, whether it's here in Iowa or in a lot of other places, which is why I support the Public Service Freedom to Negotiate Act. It makes our economy actually work for us instead of looking good just as numbers on a page. I would also argue, as somebody who, as a mayor, oversees a workforce that is represented by organized labor, including by Teamsters, that it also makes the employers better off, because you are able to sit across the table, hear the voice directly of workers and what concerns them, and earn the loyalty and the retention of a workforce that knows they're going to be taken care of. And so I believe that our employers, our companies, our government units, as well as our workers, benefit when we make sure that that right to collective bargaining and to organizing is available to all.
Mayor Buttigieg, we have a video question here from Josue Alvarez, a 26-year-old resident of Bell Gardens, California. His parents immigrated to the United States from El Salvador before he was born, in search of a better future. Josue has worked for XPO Logistics as a port truck driver at the ports of LA and Long Beach for 3 years. As a victim of misclassification, where drivers are classified as independent contractors by companies, denied benefits and the ability to organize, but treated like employees. Josue hopes to see action on the federal level. So his question is about worker misclassification.
Hello, my name is Josue Alvarez. I'm an XPO driver. I've been an XPO driver for about 3 years already. For the last 2 years, I've been receiving my wages and everything. I'm an independent contractor. By reality, I'm just another misclassified driver. I don't have any health insurance. I don't have any vacation days. I don't have any sick days. I don't have any work compensation. I don't have any disability. With our coworkers, we have tried to form a union, but we keep being turned around by XPO, telling that we're independent contractors, but we cannot bargain for better pay rates on the loads. We cannot haul other loads from other companies. And with the little wages that we get, we have to pay for our diesel, we have to pay for our tolls, maintenance on the trucks. We have to pay for our tires, we have to pay for many other things that have to do with that XPO, like big corporation like XPO should be paying for. Now in California, we have filed to see that 85 and SB 1402 passed, and now we have a little hope that government's going to be taking on misclassification. And now my question is, when you become president, what will you do to take on misclassification? What will you do to corporations like XPO to be enforced the law that they keep breaking every single day?
Great.
So Josue is asking, he's talking about misclassification of drivers, and that they don't have workman's comp, they don't have disability. They tried to form a union, but they were misclassified, so they couldn't be. And Josue's question is, when you become president, what will you do to take on misclassification? What do you do to a corporation like XPO to enforce the law that they keep on breaking every single day? Thanks.
Great. So first of all, when a company is breaking the law when it comes to labor, whether it is misclassification, interfering with union elections, not offering equal time on company time, or whatever interference it is. There need to be penalties that have enough teeth, multi-million-dollar penalties, that they actually care. Because what's happening right now is not only are they not getting enough enforcement, because we don't have enough enforcement energy and resources, whether we're talking about NLRB or whether we're talking about the Department of Labor, but even when there is enforcement, even when there's a finding that a company's been in violation, the fine doesn't have any teeth, and so they just keep doing the same thing. That will end when I'm president. The penalties will be harsh enough to make them change their action. That's number one. Number two, workers like Josue deserve these kinds of protections. And what we're seeing is not just illegal misclassification, but a lot of cases where workers are being described as a 1099, the contractor, not an employee, by companies that functionally control everything about their working experience. And so we need to adopt what's called the ABC test that basically says, if somebody controls your work experience, your pay, your working conditions, and you're doing something that's part of their business, then whether you call them, whether you put them on a 1099 or not, you're considered a worker, and they have to extend those protections and those labor rights to you. It takes away that magic between being a so-called contractor and being an employee. And as we move into the changes in the economy ahead, I would argue we also need to think about how to not only take away some of that magic that makes them want to call people contractors, but look at the full-time, part-time line too. Because this is part of why I think we got to do things differently with gig workers. As far as I'm concerned, if you're driving an Uber 9 hours out of a week, then 9 divided by 40 is how much that ought to go into your sick leave, your vacation, your ability to get benefits across the board. And we will set things up in order to make sure that benefits aren't just portable, they're prorated, so that it takes away these incentives for companies to push people into a kind of work where they're not able to get the benefits that we consider to be basic to what it is to be a worker in our economy.
Thank you, Mayor. We've talked to each other a few times here in Iowa, and I appreciate your time. And I'm not that bad a guy, really. Do you think that a free press in America is the enemy of the people?
I do not, and I'm not just working the ref on this. This is really important. How's the United States supposed to be a force for freedom and democracy around the world if our own president echoes the language of dictators in describing reporters as the enemy of the people anytime they reveal a fact that is inconvenient to the president? A democracy rests on a press. I don't always like what's in the press. I don't always like the way I'm covered, but I'll tell you this too. If we ever catch a reporter saying something that's factually incorrect, and we call them and we can prove it, they fix it. Because the press cares about the truth, just like the American people care about the truth. And coverage, whether it is favorable or unfavorable, the freedom of that coverage is the bedrock of American society and deserves to be honored and protected by the American president as it is under our Constitution.
Over the last 40 years, while worker productivity has actually increased 70%, the hourly pay of typical workers has remained essentially flat. So what would you do to help change that if you were elected president?
Glad you raised that, because we're in a moment where a lot of things are changing in the economy. A lot of things are very complicated about the future of the economy. And because some of those conversations get complicated, they have distracted us from the central problem in our economy, which is so abundantly simple that it is almost blindingly obvious, and that is this. People don't get paid enough in the United States of America. It is that simple. A lot of other stuff we can talk about and should, but let's begin with this. Certainly that's true of the minimum wage. The minimum wage is worth less in real dollars if you allow for inflation than it used to be, by quite a bit. And in not one county in the United States of America can somebody on minimum wage easily afford a 2-bedroom apartment. But this isn't just about the minimum wage, which needs to go up to 15. This is about wages across the board, because as you pointed out in the question, the wealth is there and it's being created by workers. The productivity of our economy grew enormously over the course of my lifetime. And shockingly little of that has gone to the workers who are actually generating the value. And this is not the result of some mysterious cosmic force of macroeconomics. Yeah, there's technology, yeah, there's globalization, you bet. But let's be very clear. This is the result of policy decisions. This is the result of political decisions, beginning in the Reagan era, that have disempowered workers and their ability to command more of the fruits of their labor. That will change, it must change, and it's one of the things that's at stake when I say that we must commit ourselves to a goal of doubling the rate of participation in organized labor in this country.
If elected president, and if the Bush-Lewis Act ends up on your desk, would you sign it and why?
Yes, I support it for the reasons that we shared earlier about what we've got to do to make sure that pension obligations entered into in good faith by workers are protected. And that's part, as I shared earlier, of the bigger picture of how we make sure that we have retirement security in this country. This country is headed for a crisis if we don't do something to make sure that everybody knows that they will age into a prosperous, dignified, safe, and secure retirement.
Feeling Taft-Hartley?
We definitely got to change Taft-Hartley. And by the time I'm done with it, it might deserve a different name. For example, I think it's through a change to Taft-Hartley that we do away once and for all with so-called right to work in this country.
How do you do that with such a divided government?
Great question. I'll tell you plan B and then I'll tell you plan A.
Okay.
All right, plan B is to remember this fact that the American people are with us on issue after issue, on raising wages, on delivering paid family leave. By the way, we did that in South Bend. Now, the state of Indiana wouldn't let me do it for our community, so I just did it for our city workers. We raised the minimum wage, we set up paid family leave, we delivered it, and then challenged other employers to join as we led by example. But that was as far as I could go because the state wouldn't let me, which is why we need federal law on paid family leave. But anyway, whether it's wages, family leave, whether it's immigration reform, even stuff where my party's been on defense, like gun reform, where actually most Republicans, most gun owners agree we got to do something. On issue after issue, especially when it comes to protecting and supporting workers, the American people agree with us, even in more conservative states. And so when there is a member of the House or a member of the Senate getting in the way of an action that would empower and support American workers, I believe the best use of the big blue and white airplane that comes with the Oval Office is to fly it into the home district of that member of Congress or the Senate who's getting in the way of something that's not only the right thing to do, but widely popular, and remind workers and voters in their home state or district about how much daylight there is between them and their representative. See if that doesn't bring their conscience back. That's plan B for how to deal with things like Mitch McConnell's Senate. Plan A is to have a nominee, in my biased opinion, that might be, for example, a mayor from the industrial Midwest who's a little bit outside of Washington, with enough coattails that Mitch McConnell's not in the majority or the Senate at all, and we have a better Congress to work with, the government's not so divided.
And I would imagine you'd get rid of the graveyard that's in the Senate right now, right?
The Senate's got to change. And by the way, that means a filibuster. Filibuster's got to go because it's being used to get in the way of good policy. Harry Reid, who is very much somebody who I think lived and breathed the life of that institution, has called for the filibuster to come to an end, and I agree with him.
We You're seconds away from your closing remarks, but I want to give you your due diligence. And we'd like to hear your closing remarks today from anything we didn't, the two of us didn't cover, or we didn't get to ask you with questions from the audience or via video.
Perfect. We have 30, 40 minutes? Or?
Yeah. How about 5?
5, all right, I'll take it. Well, first of all, thanks again for leading this discussion. And thanks to all of you for standing up for workers in this country. It's coming down to this. When that sun comes up, and that picture I painted for you, that sun comes up over the United States that first day that Donald Trump is no longer president, we're going to have some big problems on our hands. And one of those problems is going to be this economy, where the numbers on a page might look good, stock market might look good, but most Americans aren't feeling it. Most Americans are not getting ahead, having to fight like hell just to hold on to what we've got. Wages are not keeping up with the cost of health, or the cost of retirement, or the cost of education. Moreover, we are actually living shorter lives. Think about what that means. For the gross domestic product to go up and American life expectancy to go down at the same time. That should not even be possible. That tells you what's broken in our country right now. Now's our chance to fix it. Running to be the president who can deliver solutions that will solve those problems and unify the American people. It's that American majority I was talking about that can help us get these things done, that is with us on issue after issue, especially when it comes to working conditions and organized labor and wages and benefits. But we gotta hold it together. We know how to fight, but we can't ever get to where we think fighting is the point. We can't ever let it look like fighting's all we got. We gotta keep our eyes on what's on the other side of the fight. And I'm determined to be the president who will help us on that day pick up the pieces and move us toward actual solutions. This is what I'm getting at with an idea like Medicare for all who want it. We take a version of Medicare, make it available for every American who wants to get in on that plan. But trust you to decide whether you want it, because if you negotiated passing up wage increases for something better, you ought to be able to keep that too. The important thing is that everybody be covered one way or the other. It's a difference in my view on college. I believe that we should work with states and deliver federal funding to make sure college is tuition-free for the first 80% of Americans by income. Then a bit of a sliding scale as you go between 80 and 90. But if you're in that fortunate top 10%, I wish you well, I do. But I think you ought to pay your own college tuition so that we can use those dollars for other things, like apprenticeship programs and CTE, and stuff that's going to help people thrive in our economy, whether you went to college or not, because you should be able to do well in this economy no matter what. These are the kinds of solutions that help us deal with the issue, bring us together, and move us forward. And one more thing I will promise to you, as somebody who wore the uniform of this country, that you will not see the President of the United States laughed at by the leaders of the world when I'm your commander-in-chief. We will be a country that keeps its word, that upholds our values, and that honors our flag. We should never forget that my party's roots are in standing up for workers and standing up for those who are organizing for a better life. And that is in my heart because I saw in my own hometown the consequences of recklessness by the wrong decisions being made in corporate America. We almost died as a city when the car factories left in the 60s. We were called a dying city at the beginning of this very same decade we're living in now, and now we're growing. It's not been easy, but we're growing jobs, we're growing income, and we're growing population because we came together to actually get something done. I've seen what is possible. Having grown up in a community where the message that went out when I was a kid was, success means getting out. Get out if you want to make something of yourself. And as soon as I left, I realized I was from somewhere and knew that I had to come back, come home, and make myself useful. That's my story. And it's what propels me to make sure that every community thrives. I see in this movement that is coming together a chance not only to get rid of the presidency that we're living through right now, but to build an era we're actually going to be proud of. And we could be so proud of what we did working together, starting in 2020, to make a better American life for all of us. That is why I'm running. I believe the presidency has a purpose. And the purpose of the American presidency is not to glorify the president, It is to unify and empower the American people, and I look forward to partnering with Teamsters and with organized labor to make that happen every single day. So I'm asking you to caucus for me. For that reason, I'm thankful to be with you. I am at your side, and I look forward to what we can do to make history together. Thank you for the opportunity to be with you. Thank you.